That brings me to, first of all, big thanks to the source of our presenter, DataRobot, who's also the sponsor tonight of tonight's video, recorded as always so wonderfully and professionally by Troy Wilson. So big hand for DataRobot and for Troy. The other sponsor that I need to tell you about is Prescient, which more or less is me. And as you know by now, Prescient offers elite data science training in a growing number of courses in R and Python and data science and advanced data science and fraud detection and text analytics and time series and forecasting. And we've got a whole bunch of new stuff coming on causal impact and ontologies and heck, deep learning and any of a number of other things, as well as a stream for everybody else. So there's a data literacy stream, and there's going to be a decision making for manager stream. You know, those courses you wish everyone else in your organization did so you could be an effective data scientist, yeah, we teach those. So tell those folks to do our courses. And of course, I'm proud of our new quantum computing stream. So a very successful quantum computing course, which is already out. And Lorraine Yeo, who's hiding somewhere over there goes a hand, is creating the next quantum computing course in quantum programming and quantum circuits. So if you're interested in quality training in data science, come and talk to me. We don't have any more courses scheduled until next year, but our schedule for next year is well and truly out. And I think that brings me almost to the end of my announcements, except of course always a big thanks to Fabian Held, also hiding. Fabian? Oh, he's standing up and waving. It's a bit out of character. Hello, Fabian. The real secret to Data Science Sydney's success is, well, he's right over there. He's the man who makes it all happen. He's the co-founder of Data Science Sydney, and I would say Australia's leading expert on social network analysis for organizational effectiveness. So go and talk to him about that and more. He also knows about agent-based modeling and has a new puppy.
So, how big is the puppy?
How big is the puppy is the question. Okay, that's bigger than I remember. Well, that brings me to the main event. And you know, normally I do a long-winded presentation to tell you about how wonderful a speaker is. This time it's going to be pretty damn easy because all I have to tell you about Xavier, there's a lot to tell you about Xavier. I mean, I could tell you about the fact that he decided one day, oh, I'm in Singapore, I don't have a job, I've got nothing to do. How about I become a world expert in machine learning? How long will it take? Oh, 2 years, okay, boom. And he becomes like a world reigning Kaggle champion and one of the longest reigning, possibly the longest reigning. That's one thing. And the other thing is he's the chief data scientist of DataRobot. And if I told you that 5 years ago, you'd go, who the heck is DataRobot? And if I told you that now, you'd go, who the heck is Microsoft? Right? Not really too much that needs to be said about someone who is a VIP among VIPs, someone I'm proud to call a friend. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me at this event. It's always a pleasure for me to be in Sydney. The only downside is that you wake up 3 hours too early for someone who lives in Singapore. And also my family got very jealous when I told them that I'm visiting Sydney. So tonight I will talk about how statisticians and data scientists could learn from each other. And actually, most of my talk will be about my personal experience as a first as a statistician and after as a data scientist. So I will start my talk with a short introduction about myself and to give you a bit more context. This is what I've been doing for the last 25 years. So, in the 90s, I studied statistics, finance, and actuarial science in France. I became an actuary. I worked for life insurance and non-life insurance up to 2012. And in 2011, I fell in love with machine learning. And since then, I wanted to learn everything about machine learning. And what really boosted my learning curve was Kaggle, Australian product. And so I did many competitions on Kaggle to learn things that I couldn't learn in insurance. So it helped me to be exposed to more data science problems, and also it helped me to experiment machine learning on new data. Also, it was the opportunity to meet great people from different places in the world, and this way I also met Eugene, and I also met the founders of DataRobot. So this helped me find a job as a data scientist. So I first joined Institute of Research in Singapore, the I2R, and after I joined DataRobot in 2013. So I've been working for DataRobot for 5 years, and in DataRobot I lead the data science R&D effort, and so I learned good coding practices in DataRobot. I kept on learning about machine learning, and also I try to teach the machine good practices in data science, but also in actuarial science. Oh, the presentation is going much faster than sorry. I will try to control that. Cool. So here is the agenda of my talk. So I will first talk about what I learned when I was an actuary, and with a focus on the GLMs, which are statistical techniques that actuaries love to use. Then I will explain why I decided to convert into data science. I will mention some machine learning initiatives that combine that incorporate GLM features, and I think is a sign that there is an increasing interest from statisticians for machine learning, and interest of data scientists for statistician practices. And I will also propose ideas how data scientists can benefit from the statisticians' practices, and how statistician practices can benefit from data science. So, what did I learn when I was an actuary? I first learned that modeling in insurance is something very complex. The target that you try to predict is doesn't follow a friendly distribution. In insurance, you have to predict rare events, and when one event happens, there are many small claims, and sometimes very large claims. So the distribution of in insurance are zero inflated and skewed on the right. So I learned that not everything is normal. Also, I learned that risk don't always cannot simply add risk. and in the insurance, usually risks tend to vary multiplicatively with the rating factors in the insurance. And also I had to deal with some constraints. So first, pricing constraints. Usually in insurance, you like to say that the pricing is function is a pro rata of the policy duration. Sometimes you have to incorporate commercial constraints, but you don't want to make it for cheap. You need to compensate that, so you need to incorporate that in your model. And also you need to have a stable pricing. Actuaries in insurance also have to follow to deal with regulatory constraints. So models need to be explainable, and what you did in your model needs to make sense. And these actually make GLM very popular with actuaries, because GLMs can deal with all of what I described previously. How many people here know about GLMs? So a good proportion of you. For people who don't know yet GLMs, I recommend the Practitioner Guide to GLMs. It's quite an old paper. It was a discussion paper in 2004 from the Casual Actuarial Society of US. And it's a kind of Bible for actuaries. It's a reference book. And And so you can see GLMs as an advanced version of linear models. There are three things that make GLMs different from linear models. First, you don't assume that the variance is fixed. So you, in linear models, if you predict something that with a value of $1 million, and you predict something with with a value of $10, you expect that the residuals will be the same at the same level. The second difference is that you don't assume that the effect of the features are additive. You have a link function, so your prediction is not equal to the product of your features with coefficients, but is equal to the inverse of a link function. So the g power -1, and this is something that actually that is used also by data scientists for classification. So the link function of our logistic regression is logged, and you have something that is very interesting is the offset. So you can see the offset as an intercept that is not a constant but a vector. And we will see that offset can be something very good. So why the variance is so important for actuaries, the variance function? I guess most of you didn't hear about a variance function, but you have usually in data science we talk about in data science, we usually talk about the loss function, and actually, loss function and the variance function are the same thing. The actuaries like to use the Poisson and the Gamma distribution, and they use the Gamma distribution when risk when they want to model the severity of the claims, because the claims are very skewed on the right. And when they choose a Gamma distribution, they actually assume that the variance, so the variance of the residuals are equal to the square of the value that they predict. So when they predict that the claims will be 1 million, the certainty about the predictions, they give more tolerance of. So by doing that, they inform the models that that the models should tolerate bigger residuals when they predict large values. And this is important because it's a way to combat overfitting and not to give too much credibility to observation with very large values. The second thing that is critical for actuaries is the link function. So the actuaries like to use the log link function, and so their prediction will be equal to the exponential of the x, the product of x and the coefficients, and this enables them to ensure that the predictions that they will generate are not negative, and also he helped them to take into account the fact that risk in insurance are multiplicative and not additive. So if you the exponential of the product of x and the coefficients is equal to the product of the exponential of each feature multiplied by the coefficient. Some data scientists prefer to transform the target and to do a log transformation of the target and then use so yeah, that's acceptable practice, but be careful when you do that. You don't predict the mean, but you predict the median. And in insurance, it's really important to predict the mean. If you predict the median, you will make the price too cheap, and you will not cover the losses that you have. And so if it's important for you to predict the mean, you need to adjust your predictions if you did a log transformation of the target. And the third feature that is very important for actuaries is the offset. But actually it's not only useful for actuaries. I find that it's something that opens the door of a lot of creativity in data science, and I will try to give examples later how to do that. Actuaries use offset mostly to take into to enforce that the price is pro rata the policy duration, pro rata of the policy duration. So by doing that, they use as offset the log of the exposure. So I gave a formula that, so you can see that if you use the log of E as offset, is equal to the multiplication of E multiplied by the exponential of the product of your features and coefficients. So that's the first reason. It's also one way for them to incorporate discounts, maybe discounts for retired people or some people from a specific company, but to make it pay by others, or to find features that are correlated to this population, but still say that you do discount for this population. It's also used to incorporate a priori knowledge. So you can want to do transform learning, transfer the knowledge of one portfolio to another. If your portfolio is very small, maybe it's not enough to learn some features with a very high cardinality, and you want to use this knowledge from different product with similar characteristics, and so you can fix the effects of other products and use that as an offset. It can be one way to make your next, when you refresh your model, to make the pricing more stable. So you use the predictions of last year as an offset, and after you just control, you learn marginal effects, and you control those marginal effects. And most importantly, it can be used to do multiple stage modeling. So I will give examples of that. The idea is that you can have a first model with primary features that you really trust, and after you can build a second model with features that you trust less, and the second model is using as an offset the predictions of the first model. I will try to illustrate that later, but it's not something that I invented. It's something that I actually do sometimes, and I found that it's something very useful, and it even helped me to win some Kaggle competitions. So why? So far I said only good things about GLMs, but I was sometimes a bit frustrated when I was using GLMs, because it's hard work. GLMs don't automatically reduce the risk of overfitting. Just give you some warnings. People who use GLMs look at the p-values, and if you have a bad p-value, they tell you, oh, you should not use a feature, but it doesn't do anything. You have to do the work and to remove the features with the bad p-values, or do things with the categories with the bad p-values. So that's the first inconvenient things with GLM. And also you have to define the structure of the model manually. So if you don't want only linear effects, you have to incorporate some non-linear effects with by doing binning or using the splines, and you have to figure out yourself what to do, and it doesn't find interactions for you. So all these requires hard work. So why did I decide to convert into machine learning? So I wanted to use more data, unstructured data, and I could see that GLMs is not a practical solution for me, because I had to do this work, discard all the features that don't make sense or don't contain enough statistical signal. And this you don't need to do that when you use machine learning, because every machine learning algorithm has a regularization mechanism that automatically combats overfitting. And one of the most simplest example is regularize a GLM. So you use exactly the same GLM loss function as a GLM, but you add penalties on the coefficients. I'm sure that most of you know about that, but actuaries didn't use to know regularize GLM, and did all the hard work looking at the p-values. The second reason is that I found that with machine learning, I didn't have to define myself the nonlinear relationship between the features and the target. Many algorithms do that for you, and also many algorithms find interactions automatically. And so my favorite algorithms are gradient boosting machine, random forest, neural network, or support vector machine that automatically find the complexity in the data. And actually I love that, because what I enjoy the most is to do feature engineering, to extract features from multiple data sets, transactional data, and I was happy to delegate to the machine the hard work, and to focus on what really matters, the data, and not to look at the p-values and try to find the structure myself. So I got some frustration too when I use machine learning, because in 2011, when I started with machine learning, most of the open source algorithms didn't support my favorite features from GLMs. They couldn't use the gamma distribution, the 3D distribution, they couldn't use the offset, or couldn't choose the link function. Things changed a lot since 2011, and one of a very good example of this change is the XGBoost package. The XGBoost package is one of the most popular package in data science, and since 2016, XGBoost supports the Poisson gamma 3D distribution, so everything that make actuaries happy. The offset too is not called offset, it's called base. I don't remember that. Yeah, something base, and also support the log link function. And XGBoost went even beyond that. So I guess it was also very sorry for that. I stopped to put my hands there. So since 2016, XGBoost also supported the monotonicity constraints, and it's something that people in insurance or bank love, but also is something that can be useful outside those industries. So it's something that helps you incorporate domain knowledge. So sometimes you have, you know that it doesn't make sense if your predictions decrease when the one factor is increasing. And sometimes you can see XGBoost having step functions that are not very smooth and decrease, and it's just because they capture a noise. So usually you can improve the accuracy of the models by adding this knowledge. And in certain industries, it will help you not to be fired. So in insurance, if your pricing is decreasing with the sum insured, you will be in trouble. The pricing should always increase with the sum insured. So it's one way to control XGBoost. More recently, XGBoost also did things with sharp values. So they keep on making things that will make the statistician more comfortable. So for me, it's a good sign that data scientists are learning from statistician, and the statistician maybe started to be interested in XGBoost and ask for those type of features. So why statistician and data scientists should be excited by this is for me, XGBoost and all the gradient boosting machine learning, gradient boosting machine implementation are very close cousin to GLMs. So in the formula of GLMs, we had the product of coefficient X. Actually, you can see gradient boosting machine as the formula is the same, except that the X is not the original input, but it's features that have been generated by XGBoost. So it's rules that have been automatically generated by XGBoost. So I feel that this will give a good framework for us people who like GLMs to do things that they are used to do. So they still can use those distributions that they like. They can use the offset, the log-link function, and I also feel that data scientists can add to their toolkit tricks from other communities and tricks from actuaries, and use exponential distribution, link function, and graph, and offsets. XGBoost is not the only one doing that. So here I listed quite a few initiatives. So in DataRobot we support offset for gradient boosting machine, but also ElasticNet and support the vector machine. We also support the Poisson, Gamma, and 3D distribution for the same models and neural network. And H2O did similar things, and yeah. So here is a deeper focus on how can data scientists benefit from GLM features. Usually observe that data scientists don't really know those features. The first thing that can be useful for them is to use those Gamma distribution, Poisson distribution, or even 3D to have more robust models and avoid to overfit large values. But maybe this doesn't really happen frequently with for data scientists who are maybe more exposed to classification problems and more friendly targets. But this can be useful. Also, I encourage you trying the logging function. The multiplicative formula can make sense for your problem, and also it can help you to blend two very different solutions and get a better score on Kaggle. Yeah, just remember here that that is something that is possible, and I believe that offset is something that can be really useful for data scientists. First, to incorporate non-effects, a priori knowledge, but also it's one way for you to mitigate bias. So more people are talking about bias. So I'm not talking about bias detection, but bias mitigation. Well, the example that I gave earlier, primary features, secondary features. So if you still want to use some features, but you know that they might expose you to bias, you can keep them as a secondary feature. And I will give one concrete example of that. And also, you can do boosting via the use of offset. So here is one example of Kagglers talking about some documentation of XGBoost that explain how to build a gradient boosting machine on the prior predictions. And so it looks like that, data scientists already start to use that to try to get more accurate models. Here I will give you the example of how offset helped me win a competition. So I did a very interesting competition organized on Kaggle by GE, and we had to predict the flight delays in US, and we had a lot of data about the weather of the plans of the flights, and we had all the details of the flights during 3 months. So when I analyzed the data, I could observe that flights delays can be explained by bad weather. They can be explained by challenging traffic conditions. And also I could see that some airports don't have many delays. And all of that made sense, except maybe that some airports are never late. And by thinking about that, I could realize that I had to be careful. Since I had only 3 months of data, some airports were never late because there was no bad weather during those last 3 months. And so in the competition we needed to build the models to predict delays in the future. So we didn't have to predict the past, but the future. And we had 3 months of data from November to January, and we had to predict delays in February or March. And So I was very afraid that the machine learns that flights will never be late in Houston because there was no delays during the last 3 months. So what I did, I followed the actual practice to build the first set of features that have made sense to me. So the features on the weather conditions, the features on the traffic conditions, and I forced the machine to learn from that. And only when the machine learned from those features, I expose the machine to the name of the airport, because the airport still has, you can still consider that some airports are better managed than others, but I wanted the machine to learn only the marginal effect of the airport. And this helped me to have more robust models, because I could predict that flights will be late in Houston when they will have bad weather. And I didn't know whether there will be bad weather or not, because I had to give my model in January, and I didn't know what would be the weather in February. So this is one example of the use of offset. You can have multi-stage modeling. One stage where you use only features that you trust, and after a second stage where you give a chance to other features that maybe are more some signal that you want to capture, but you don't want to rely too much on that. We do the same things with our kids. We first teach them the values, our own values, and after we let them go to school. So it's a bit the same idea. How can statisticians benefit from machine learning? Many statisticians will tell you I need a fully explainable model and a simple model. But even if they want a simple model, I think they can benefit from data science. First, they can use machine learning algorithms as a benchmark, and to evaluate how much they leave on the table if they use a simpler model. And actually, some of our clients in banking do that in the risk department. They challenge the models built by the other teams with data robots and compare the accuracy. You can also explore faster new data. Since you don't have to deal with all those p-values, you can work on extracting new data and check whether these adds any value, and improve the predictions. And also those statisticians can learn from the model insights, from the partial dependence, from the interaction detection, to build their model structure. The machine can help them to focus on the features that for which the machine captures non-linear effects and found interactions. The insights that you can get are, for example, from partial dependence, so you can see that if you want to build to to build beans, for this feature, it could make sense. The relationship is not fully linear. It's flat in some areas, and after it decreases. So it can help you to decide on the boundaries for your binning. And what I said earlier, you can also find the most impactful interactions. And so what is the idea here? Okay, I skip the third one. So when you do that, when you copy XGBoost, you need to be careful because XGBoost is quite smart. And when you do binning, you have to be aware that GLM don't know anything about the order of the beans. So the GLM will not know that the bean 20 of the age 2025 is a bean that is adjacent to the bean 1520 and 2530. And if you don't have enough statistical material for the bean that you copied from XGBoost, you might face the situation that I'm illustrating here to find coefficients that don't make sense at all for the beans that you created. So the GLM with the beans that you copied from XGBoost will not perform as well as XGBoost. Here, actually, you can deal with this problem by copying the Hinton's dark knowledge ID. So Jeff Hinton proposed an interesting solution that consists of training a simpler model that mimics a more complex model. And actually did that because it's a very complex deep learning networks can be too expensive a prediction, and actually he showed that by training simpler deep learning models on those blends of multiple deep learning models, he could have similar accuracy and even sometimes better accuracy. Actually, nothing prevents you from doing that with something that is not deep learning. You can do that with a gradient boosting machine and linear models. So you can build linear models that copy XGBoost. And these actually will avoid that. So you can, this will prevent your linear model solution to overfit beans with not enough statistical material. Because what the linear models is learning is learning the age. So you fit your linear models. The target of your linear model is not anymore the raw target, but the predictions of the XGBoost. And by doing that, so it's something that we did in DataRobot. You can get a very good accuracy. Have a strong transparency and explainability. You won't get as good accuracy as XGBoost because you are simplifying the solution. For some situation, you can do better than XGBoost if there is a lot of uncertainty in the to deal with. But you can have something that reproduce very well what XGBoost did. Another idea that I would like to share is Fuse Lasso. So Fuse Lasso is not something new. It's actually something quite old, and it has been created by the same guy as regularized GLM, XGBoost, and so it's Tibriciani who developed Fuse Lasso. And I learned that from a Japanese people that I met, but also it's something that is getting popular in Europe. And the magic here is that comes from new penalties that you incorporate in your regularized GLM. So we saw earlier that in the most common way to use the most common way to incorporate penalties is to add penalty of the absolute value of the coefficients or the square value of the coefficients. Here in Fuse Lasso, you add additional constraints. You add a constraint on the difference between coefficients, and so you can, if you do binning, so you can inform the model that the coefficients that you have for the bin 2025 should not be too different from the bin 1520. Should not be too different from the bin 2530. And you can even do that for some categorical features. If you have some knowledge from an expert in your company and say that those two industries, small industries, should be similar, you can add penalty on the coefficients for those two industries. So it makes that you can better inform the models and take more risk in your model structure. So you can create small bins because you inform the machine that actually two adjacent bins are something similar, and you should not have different coefficients if you don't have anything to that relevant that say that the coefficients should be different. Yeah.
So the ordering of the features must affect that.
Sorry?
The ordering of the features must affect that. How do you control that effect?
Yeah, so it's by defining the structure of the penalties that you define the order. So you have to manually say when you create your bins, you create also your matrix of penalties.
So you're incorporating your a priori knowledge of the...
Yeah.
The generalized Fuse Lasso ordering is far less important.
So this, the generalized Fuse Lasso is for categorical features. I'm not fully sure that it seems very brute force and very expensive to try to do that on all combinations of categorical features. all the levels of categorical features. What I like very much is a graph, a guided fuse lasso, because it's something that can help you better models interactions in the GLM. And the data can be very sparse when you, if you do interactions of two bin features. And it can also be very useful for geospatial data. So if you have a longitude, latitude, you can use that too. So there is no reason. You know that two neighbors, the two neighborhoods that are close to each other should be similar. So you, if there is no data, not enough data for one neighborhood, you should have a coefficient similar to maybe a larger neighborhood.
Is there a Bayesian prior analog to these constraints?
So you can call that the Bayesian approach. So you incorporate your knowledge by defining the penalties. And you can do that also even with postal code. So, yeah.
What I meant was that different generalized linear error functions and regularization constraints tend to correspond to fairly standard Bayesian priors. In the Bayesian context, I was wondering whether these fused lasso constraints also correspond to well-known priors.
I have not seen. I guess it is something that can be demonstrated. For me, at least the idea is the same. Is to incorporate a priori knowledge and. So I hope I didn't get you too excited because there is no strong implementation of that. The last thing that I saw, the last interesting paper I saw is from someone from Melbourne, a PhD in Melbourne, and he wrote some things about how to use Fuse. The last papers on Fuse I saw was more for images, and so maybe a good implementation of Fuse Lasso will come from Australia.
I'm wondering if the ordinal is also looks like it might have time series applications just because of the sequentiality. So it's it's not because you love machine learning that you should forget about GLMs. There could be the nice things coming from GLMs, and one of those is Fuse Lasso. And it was my last slide. So the takeaway is that the two communities maybe took some time to learn from each other. First, the statisticians that didn't like the machine learning because they considered machine learning as a black box. Machine learning is less and less a black box, and statisticians can learn from machine learning insights, and the data scientists can use some tricks from a statistician too, and there are still some innovation like Fuse Lasso. Fuse Lasso is not a new thing, but it could get more popular in the future, and I find that it is a kind of a combination of statistical approach and machine learning. So that's all.
Would you please all join me in thanking Xavier for Naturally, we're swearing Xavier to secrecy. He's not allowed to repeat this presentation anywhere else in the world, and Data Science Sydney now has an advantage in ongoing Kaggle competitions. Well, no, but it would be nice, wouldn't it? Questions? I'm sure there are. Yuri,
Hey, so my question,
Do we have a
probably
microphone?
you had something on your slides. It's categorical features. All right, we need microphone.
you're going to here we are. Here we are. This
So
thing's
my question-
loaded.
My question is about categorical features. You had something on your slide, but you didn't talk about them. I know that Kaggle invented some tricks which probably previously not known much to statisticians. Can you tell us something about your experience? What I mean is probably mean encoding. So what you used, what works, what do you think can be done with high cardinality categorical features?
True that Kagglers have been very creative with categorical features. So I saw that some people are using what they call count features, so the count features is so you count the frequency of every level in your training data, and it's something that can make sense because in some situation you learn that maybe let's say it's a zip code that a city that actually the city the zip code comes from a large model. Sorry, the zip code comes from a large city. I actually do something different. I do ordinal encoding. So ordinal encoding is converting the levels into numeric features, and it's something also that Kagglers do before XGBoost. And usually they do it in a random manner. And what I actually do is that I combine the ordinal encoding with the count features, and the way I set I map the levels with the numeric features. I try to I incorporate the frequency. So the one is the least frequent level, 2 is the second least frequent, and the highest number will be the most frequent level. And this helps you to actually help XGBoost to group automatically levels that are might be similar because they have a small size. You don't force XGBoost to do that, but you help XGBoost to do it. While if you do a random generation of the numeric values, this will not work well. And there is also something that I observe from Kagglers is they use something that is very similar to what actuaries do with credibility theory. So they learn from the target, but they combat overfitting, so to not overlearn about the target. They incorporate, so it's a Bayesian approach. What they learn is the weighted average of the global mean and the mean of the average that they observe for this level. So they incorporate. They have so this approach was used by multiple Kagglers. Some use directly this Bullman credibility approach. Others use linear mixed models, and others use ElasticNet to do something similar. But you need to be very careful not to overfit, and so you, if you do that, maybe you should do a five-fold cross validation and use stack predictions of what else they are doing.
Good. Thank you.
No questions over here. Hey everybody, my name is Dan Adler. I work for an organization called Career Academy. We do like programs to upskill people who want to get into data science for the first time, know nothing, sort of like game changers. So question for you, obviously data science, there's sort of some statistics barrier in general, and some people are generally scared when they first enter a career in this to learn that mathematics for the first time. Question for you, since we're having a talk that sort of bridges the gap between stats and data science, if you were starting your career right now, with all these data science tools out there and available, do you still think coming from the statistics foundation is helpful before going to the data science foundation, or do you think it's okay to jump into the data science first?
My first advice for people who are starting with data science is to do data science only if they like to solve problems. So because it's the main goal of data science is to learn to make sense of data and to learn to apply common sense. And so that's the first recommendation. And after I will encourage them to learn how to interpret a model, and then I will encourage them to learn from the basics of statistics, learn that things that, but at the same time inform them that they can forget about the p-values, and teach them that machine learning offering automated way to combat what we used to combat manually, and I will and after if they really want to be a strong data scientist, to build a good intuition on the what the key models like Gradient boosting machine, Random Forest are doing. If they want really to have fun, I will encourage them to do deep learning. Actually, with image, you can do very cool things. But I observe that it's not something very much. It's not what will give you a good job. If you want to work for a Commonwealth Bank, maybe they will not be so impressed by your skills on the images, and they will like that. But I agree that deep learning is very cool. And,
I think it's a question following up on the last two. I'm curious about the other side of things. I'm curious about all those things that statistics does that maybe machine learning doesn't do as well. And returning to Yuri's question, but from a different direction, you were talking about high cardinality categoricals. The one thing you mentioned which concerned high cardinality categoricals and something machine learning I don't think does very well. You talked about using mixed modeling to deal with this problem. Mm-hmm. Do you think that data science needs to be a bit broader in dealing with non-IID data and data of this kind?
Yeah, I guess it's something that has not been very much under the radar of data science. I don't have yet a solution how to incorporate that. I'm very excited with Fuse Lasso because I found that it's a good way to go back to statistics, but incorporate everything that is good for machine learning. No, I don't have a. Yeah, maybe you have the answer.
I know it's an open question.
Yeah.
And not to rub it in, folks, but Fuse Lasso sounds like yet another advanced statistical tool which you only get in
Yeah.
Charles.
Actually, I have two questions, both related to the Kaggle experiment. So, when you did the Kaggles, the challenges, did you work with a team or did you all do it by yourself?
It depends on the competition. I really enjoyed to do competition with other teammates because at the beginning I was very isolated in Singapore, so it was a good way for me to meet other data scientists in other places in the world. It's more what I usually like when I work in a team with other people is that the strategy was not to talk to each other before the last 2 weeks, because good models are very strong accuracy needs diversity, and so if you don't talk to each other during most of the time, you probably bring its own perspective. Also, I found that it makes you a bit lazy when you know that someone might work on is working on the. You can rely on the good ideas of another person. So sometimes we team up very early in the competition, but we just exchange the predictions, but not the solution. And only at the last 2 weeks we exchange ideas and try to get new ideas from the ideas that. And it was a very interesting process because you can compare the ideas of your teammates with your own, and you learn a lot because you do the effort.
Thank you very much. I worked at A-Star in Singapore myself, so I can imagine you feel a bit isolated sometimes. Right now I work for a company that has to sell a data robot. And I always wondered, wouldn't it be the ultimate promotion if Data Robot won a few Kaggles? Using the program.
So in Data Robot we try to we want to have a very predictive model, but in a reasonable way. So runtime is something that should not be too deep. Too long, or we will make the user experience not great. Also, prediction time is something that can be problematic for the user. So you still need extra work to get those very little accuracy improvement to get the first place. It's something that I did at the beginning when I was working in Data Robot. I tried to keep on competing, and I found that it was too distracting because during the last 3 weeks, you need that if you really want to win the competition, you need to do unreasonable things. And also, yeah, I could see that my wife will divorce me.
Last
That's kind of
question.
my weekend.
Okay, so it's a question about feature engineering.
Yeah.
So briefly, my question is, where does domain knowledge comes in when it comes to feature engineering? Because I heard you saying, when you were saying like why you switched to machine learning, you said one of the advantage is that you don't need to work out the feature relationship between the outcome, like the relationship between the outcome and the features. And also you mentioned something like common sense, which I assume is correlating to domain logic, like domain knowledge. So my question is, how do these two things come together? And like, do we need much domain knowledge to do some of the machine learning stuff? And also, we know that Walmart has done some analysis over the transactions and say that beers are best sold with diapers, which is not complying with some common sense, at least not mine. So like currently we have like 80 and 90 features, but then we found out that the training process is very costly, and I'm not sure if it's safe to kind of like remove some of the features based on our common sense or / domain knowledge, and when should we do that, when we shouldn't do that? It's an open question again. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel that common sense is really important. Quite often the common sense is sufficient. You don't really need to have a strong domain knowledge. The domain knowledge can be useful for if you don't know what are diapers and beers. Maybe only expert can explain you what it is, and then it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I feel that it should be sometimes part of the last step to check and now there are tools to do that, to check to check whether all the insights you get make sense, and if you see that there are some features with not so much value that don't make sense, my recommendation is to discard them. If you see that they are bringing a lot of value, yeah, you should investigate why. So maybe your common sense doesn't work well, or there is a problem with the data. Yeah.
So when you train it, the more features, the better. That's what you're saying, basically.
When at the beginning you can do a lot of features, use a lot of features, but at the end, you can reduce with less features. So it depends very much on how much risk you take if you do wrong predictions. So if it can be costly for your company to do wrong predictions, it's good that you validate that the models make sense. If it's not that important for the company, maybe you should just let the machine do the work, and because your time to spend or to discard those features will cost too much to your company. So it's not.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, can you all please join me once again in thanking David? So before we go, we have our final announcements, last announcements for the year. I think Mark or John might want to say something about Data Robot.
Great job.
John?
Yeah. Cheers, mate. Hi, John from Data Robot. We just wanted to just let you know that we have data science jobs. We actually have data science jobs kind of all over the world, but we do have them in Sydney at the moment. So if you're interested in playing with great tech and interacting with all kinds of data science teams around Australia, come and join us.
And Singapore is a nice place too.
Is there anyone else with job announcements or indeed any other? Oh, there's a job announcement from Mike. And the CBA announcement, of course.
Hey, Mike from Nearmap. Regarding deep learning and imagery, there are jobs in deep learning and imagery. With us, but you've got to be really good at it, so come and chat.
Any more jobs? Pash?
Hi, yeah, everyone. Thanks for coming this evening. This was our last one of the year. I'm sure Eugene will highlight when we'll be back. But yeah, CBA is continuing to host into next year, so look forward to seeing you again. And I hope I don't have to see you before that to chase you up to get your pass back off you. So please make sure you put it in the box, the round hole, on your way out this evening. Thank you.
Thank you all for making Data Science Sydney amazing for yet another year, and see you all next year. Oh, one more announcement. So, no thanks, sorry.
So it's a job advertisement. So I'm a senior data engineer in Airtasker, and we have a data team, but we're still acquiring more data engineers / data scientists. So if you're into data, whether it's in the engineering bit, which is learning from the past, and on the science bit, which is predicting the future, just reach out to me. Thank you very much.
They're coming thick and fast.
Hey guys, I work for CommBank internally as a talent sourcing specialist supporting the analytics portfolio. So we basically pipeline throughout the year for talent in data engineering and data science. So if anyone's interested in roles with us, whether it's now or in the future, feel free to come speak to me. I'll just be standing in the corner over there. Thank you.
Any last takers?
Is anyone else standing between these people and the pizzas? What remains to do?
Don't promise too much.
I call this meeting ended. Go and finish the pizzas.